Доброго дня, шановні пані.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Ukrainian Crisis Media Center continues its work, and we welcome everyone who is present here and watches us online. So we now invite the speakers to discuss our today's topic, the fragile groups of population in the warlike conditions. How to take into account their needs. Today, our Human Rights Center presents its preliminary, so to say, assessments on how the aggression of the Russian Federation has affected the vulnerable groups of population. Certainly, conditions of these hostilities has affected all categories of population of Ukraine, but Ukrainian society is not homogeneous, and we are, let's say, proud of this fact because we consider it to be the human capital of our people, of our nation. And but there are certain categories of population that have been affected by this change of conditions in a specific way, in a particular way, let's say. So we are going to discuss how to take into account their needs in these changed conditions and how to do that in a long-term perspective, taking into account both societal needs of our society as a whole and these vulnerable groups of population. Together with our partners from the Center Vostok-SOS and with support of the American Association and our partners from the Association of the Jewish non-governmental organizations and communities and also of the LGBT rights center Nash Svit and also the Women's Fund of the Roma community, meaning the Gypsy community of Ukraine. Together we are going to discuss these issues with the expertise that is going to be contributed by the representatives of these NGOs that I have already mentioned. So these experts and representatives of the organizations that I have already mentioned, we are going to discuss how the hostilities, the war affected the needs of those categories of population and what could be the requests, our requests to the donor community for their potential assistance and help. I would like to turn the floor over first to Ms. Horpinchenko, who is the representative. She's the communication manager of the fund Vostok-SOS. I would like to start by saying that the situation has been quite difficult for and with the citizens of Ukraine who started moving from one area of the country to another, certainly due to the hostilities that are going on. And so internally displaced persons, understandably, require a lot of assistance, both in terms of lodging and medical assistance, if need be, psychological assistance, and also with the view of the need for their reintegration into their new communities, into the communities into which they arrived. First of all, the lodgings, where the housing for them. Certainly, it's a long-term issue. Some people, even from the areas that were from the communities into which Ukrainian armed forces returned, they found that they could not find any of their previous housing because it was damaged by the war. So today's situation is that these internally displaced persons, they mostly live either with their own relatives or friends, or in some administrative buildings, hostels, and sometimes even schools or kindergartens that are vacant. And as we know, this has been a long-term problem for some time already, and we would like to certainly facilitate somehow the construction of new housing. And here certainly where to place these people and what type of housing to build and where, it should all be previously analyzed and assessed so that the people could be integrated into the communities in which they are trying to find new jobs, to have some services that are essential, and so that they can have some degree of comfort in their new places of residence. And so we can now discuss the opportunities of, for example, allowing those people to dwell in the administrative buildings that are now vacant, like hospitals, kindergartens, schools that have their vacations. And now the children are on holiday, so we are talking about around 8 million people that, according to the Ukrainian authorities, are considered to have moved from one place to another. Many of them, certainly, many of those who went abroad have already returned back into Ukraine. But still, the problem remains quite essential, especially when we talk about such categories of population as elderly people, the people who, for various reasons, need some care, and certainly we need to take into account the role of the volunteers who are trying to provide these services, this care. I must say that local authorities are not always as friendly as is desirable vis-a-vis those new, members of their communities. So we need to take all that into account, where people could be moved and whether it is worthwhile to provide them with the dwellings in the densely populated communities, considering the capacities of the local social services, healthcare service. We oftentimes encounter the situation when the local authorities respond that we do not have any vacant spaces for these newly arrived internally displaced persons. So this is the issue on which we are trying to establish some cooperation, some sort of cooperation with the government, with the state, proceeding with the understanding that we need to do something so that people are not left, so to say, without the roof, any roof over their heads, and another aspect that I would like to touch upon is humanitarian assistance. I'm less expert in this area, but it doesn't mean that this area has become less important, because the front line moves, and people who are in the vicinity, find themselves in the vicinity of the front line, they certainly are usually willing to leave those areas, so they need to have some assistance in this sphere. Therefore, we need to establish cooperation with foreign donors and somehow address our requests to them. Certainly, as the war has entered its fourth month, there are much fewer internally displaced persons, but still it's a rather massive phenomenon. And again, as I have already mentioned, both the housing for these people, and also such issues, administrative issues, as for example, even the renovation of the documents for the people who have lost those documents, personal documents, when they were leaving their houses hastily. All these things, and healthcare issues, medical supplies, even for the people who are psychologically affected, who consider themselves to be, under stress, to have been under stress, or to be under stress for some time. After that, they consider themselves psychologically traumatized. And the aspect that I have already mentioned, that is one of the most important, perhaps, this is the reintegration of the internally displaced persons into the new communities where they might reside for some time, or maybe for a long time. These people need to understand their new communities, what is what there, what could be the options for their integration in another town or village or city into which they have moved. And we certainly need here the assistance of the non-governmental organizations, because it's not a secret that sometimes these newly arrived internally displaced persons, they have to confront even animosity, if verging on the hostility on the part of the local authorities, local residents, who react very, very negatively oftentimes to the arrival of these new people, new members of their communities. So these conflicts that you have read about, probably, or saw in the social networks, they should be somehow contained, so that they do not acquire any sort of massive, do not become a massive phenomenon. Let me remind our listeners and viewers that you can also put your questions. We are going to reserve some time for questions and answers after the initial remarks of our today's speakers and participants, every one of which, according to our schedule, could have 5 to 7 minutes of time for their presentations and for their remarks. Now let me turn. I will turn over the floor to the representative of the Mejlis of the Crimean Tatars, the chairman of the Crimean Tatar Resource Center, Eskender Bariev. I would like, says Mr. Bariev, to start with thanking, first of all, the Center of Civil Liberties and the NGO Vostok-SOS for having invited me for today's event. And I would also like to point out that in Ukraine we have a lot of different nationalities, including the Gypsies, the Crimean Tatars, the Russians, the Poles, the Ukrainians, Jewish people, and speaking about specifically the ethnicities that live in Crimea, in the Crimea. There are the Crimean Tatars and also the Karaim community. And we, our Crimean Tatar Resource Center was trying to register any of the violations or persecutions. For instance, there were 277 people arrested for various violations by the new Russian authorities in the Crimean Peninsula. 177 of them are Crimean Tatars. Many of them are in the preliminary confinement facilities, and around 120 of them are Crimean Tatars. Also in Kherson and Zaporozhye Oblast, administrative regions of Ukraine, there are also Crimean Tatar communities. In Kherson region near Genichesk, there was a more or less compact area where the Crimean Tatars live. So our organization tasked itself with registering the wrongdoings against or vis-a-vis the Crimean Tatars that live in those areas during the hostilities. According to our data, in the territories affected by hostilities, there have been 194 kidnappings, around 70 of whom, of those kidnapped, were the representatives of the Crimean Tatar community. We have information about many of them. They are in the police stations or in the detention facilities, prisoner detention facilities, pre-trial detention facilities. But there are people of whom we have no information. There were the cases when the police, when searching the armed persons who were suspected of terrorist activity, there were the situations when the flats and apartments were forcefully entered into by the policemen. there were the rumors of some sort of tortures by the police, and we have heard some information about some sort of re-education facility, and so they try to convince those detained that they should not curse Putin, and you know what were the terms that were used here in Ukraine against Putin. And if we speak about what kind of accusations have been leveled against those detained, some of them were accused of being the members of the organization Eskender, that was considered a terrorist organization by the Russian authorities. Some of them were accused of the membership in the battalion, some sort of Tatar national battalion, which was pro-Ukrainian. And so these members of those armed formations, they have been persecuted. For us, it is important to register the facts of persecutions, if any of such facts occur. And I would like to draw your attention also to the information that in Melitopol, the director of the local Crimean Tatar museum was detained for some time, and also his deputy for logistics. And therefore, the representatives of these nationalities, those of them who had left the territories that were taken by the Russian armed forces, some of these representatives of Crimean Tatars, they left those areas and even left Ukraine. They went to Romania and some other countries. So we are now trying to take care of the conditions for them so that they can live there in comfortable conditions. Why is it important for us to display some care with regard to those displaced persons? Because we would, first of all, like to preserve our national identity, and we know that it is important for our donors, for our partners, and so it is important to keep this identity, ethnic identity or religious identity, and the values and traditions that they have inherited from previous generations. So that's why I would like to draw your attention to the definitions of what nationalities or ethnicities could be considered, so to say, traditional local ethnicities, and how to better preserve their ethnic and historical values. And I would like to emphasize that the representatives of these such ethnicities They serve in the Ukrainian armed forces. Many of them serve in the Ukrainian armed forces, countering this aggression. Let me now turn the floor over to Mr. Zisels, Yosif Zisels, who is the president of the Association of the Jewish non-governmental organizations and communities. I would like to start by thanking the organizers of this meeting for their invitation. And I'd like to say that ethnic and religious communities, they have some specific features and during the times, testing times, like the times of hostilities, for instance, these ethnic communities, they have their own modes of behavior, so to say, and it is important that the local authorities pay attention to those specific ways of behaving in different situations. But unfortunately, I must say that the local authorities, after we draw their attention to these, special ethnic needs, we didn't find any reciprocity, so to say, any agreeable reaction on their part. Our organization has been active in its efforts aimed at reintegrating the members of our communities into the local communities, and this is one of our proclaimed missions of our organization. It has been for the last 20 years. And I'm sure that some other sectors of civil society have been aiming towards, this goal of reintegration, but unfortunately not always there was reciprocity of the local authorities and sometimes even governmental bodies. I'm not going to elaborate on that, but I would like to say a few words about specific features of the behavior, of the reactions of the Jewish ethnic and religious community in these warlike conditions. First of all, assessing the war that is going on today, I must say that we do not consider that this war has any directly related with the Jewish ethnicity features in this war. And what is the difference of behavior of the Jewish religious and ethnic community if compared to the other ethnic communities and religious communities here in Ukrainian conditions? We created, in fact, our Congress 20 years ago in order that these specific features be taken into account by Ukrainian authorities. I would like to, first of all, point out the demographic aspect. The median age of the members of the majority of Jewish people in Ukraine, they are close to 60 years of age. They are pension or pre-pension age. A lot of them need some care, some specific health care aspects. And in these conditions, when there are massive evacuations of population. The efforts of our organization have certainly been aimed, first of all, at facilitation of the evacuation of the members of the Jewish community of advanced age, first of all. It certainly soon became controversial because it's difficult to evacuate people of one age and not, try to somehow assist in the evacuation of the people of different other age groups. Therefore, our main effort was to facilitate the evacuation of the members of the communities in Dnipropetrovsk region, the other regions, including Kiev, and as Ms. Nasta has already pointed out, we have assisted in organizing the bus routes, evacuation by bus of the people who wanted to be evacuated to the safe areas. I must say that if initially it was more or less ethnically, so to say, organized effort, it soon became more universal, more comprehensive, and the members of the other ethnicities also could have availed themselves of these efforts. I must say also that one of the specific features of the Jewish community is that under these, in the difficult conditions, the people who have been or who had been somehow not connected at all in their usual lives, they start organizing themselves, start establish contacts, and try to undertake certain, coordinated efforts in order to help each other and be evacuated and provide humanitarian assistance and so on. We tried also tried to involve the Embassy of Israel to these efforts, but initially it was not successful. But then, in the course of the enlargement of the hostilities, it became much more successful, and we have enjoyed so far a lot of assistance. Speaking about the capacity of our organizations, we were not able to organize, the whole trains for our evacuees, but some of the rail carriages, the buses were mobilized, so to say, and so we applied more, so to say, pointed approach, helping the families, helping some individuals who were willing to leave. We assisted them in doing that, especially initially, especially in the rural areas. We did a lot in order to organize these efforts. The organizations of the Jewish community has also succeeded in organizing a number of the reception facilities, which were, so to say, transitory facilities, where people who were being evacuated and moving, especially those moving abroad, they could spend some time on their way to the foreign countries. And I must say that international organizations also assisted, especially with financing of these reception facilities, transitory reception facilities. Practically all of them were financed by the donors from international organizations. In the Carpathian Mountains, we organized a project where psychological assistance is provided to the people who found themselves for some time near the area of, close combat facility, close combat front line, and people who who are willing to take part in that project, they can enjoy the 3-week stay in the Carpathian Mountains, where they are being counseled by professional psychologists. We have they are usually organized 3 groups for children and 2 groups for the adults, and the psychologists assist them, counsel them on their psychological problems. We are renting the facilities, usually the health resorts, buildings and premises, and in the course of our organized effort of psychological assistance, we have already provided psychological assistance to 3 groups, 50 people each, and we also have around 200 people in our waiting list for a visit to this psychological assistance facility, and we are analyzing currently the situation, and if need be, we are thinking of enlarging the number of those people from 50 to 200 possibly. We are also trying to provide more active medical assistance in terms of supplies of medical medicines. If we speaking about the scale, so to say, of the movement of the members of Jewish community, it's difficult certainly to give any exact numbers, but I must say that people who moved from the southern and eastern areas of Ukraine, they successfully relocated to the other areas where they enjoy rather comfortable conditions, and even their religious needs are assisted. They can attend the synagogues and so on and so forth. At the same time, I would like to emphasize that we are trying to enlarge our effort so that we do not provide assistance to only the Jewish people, but also to the members of other ethnic and religious categories. We have helped to a number of injured. We also we have helped to a painter, for instance, who has lost his his studio. I found a partner in Boston who willingly assisted with some donorship, donor financing for the renovation of his studio. As now the Jewish state exists, the state of Israel, although its attitude to a number of aspects of the situation is sometimes quite debatable, but still the right of repatriation to Israel exists, and I must say that a lot of people have already used that right, and they moved to Israel. At the same time, many Jewish people moved to the Central and West European countries. a lot of those people obviously would not return to Ukraine, but to the credit of our organization, I must say that we have provided all possible assistance for those people to move from Ukraine into any foreign country of the choosing of those people, and we assisted to those of them who wanted to move to Israel eventually. We provided our assistance to them too. So I would like to finish by saying that our effort is not only limited to the Ukrainian, to the Jewish communities on the territory of Ukraine. We have been doing our international effort, and we have been even assisting to the Jewish people who wanted to leave Russia, using finances, all means of financing at our disposal. But my conclusion, says Mr. Zisels, is that the Jewish population of Ukraine would significantly diminish after these events. I would like to ask the speakers now to call on. I would like to call on the speakers and invite them to, to limit their remarks to, to the topic of our today's meeting. Which is the special needs of the vulnerable categories of population. Now the floor is given to the representative of the Roma or Gypsy community. Mr. Kondur, Julian Kondur. Mr. Kondur says that a lot has been said about humanitarian efforts and the organizations of the Gypsy or Roma community are not any different. The Gypsy community has also been active in helping the Gypsy population. And there was even an instance when the members of the Gypsy community somehow took a Russian tank. And so our organization is focused on resisting. That is probably for our organization a point number one, and we support the members of those organizations who resist the aggression of Russia. I also would like to say about speaking about the vulnerable groups of population, vulnerable categories of population. I would like to say that it is important also to participate in the rebuilding of the areas affected by by war, by fighting. Our team and me, we are trying to assess the conditions for different Roma people, Roma communities, asking them if they would like to, whether they would like to leave Ukraine and go abroad. And we also try to establish closer contact with the government agencies, the freedom of consciousness, so to say, freedom of consciousness committee at the within the government of Ukraine, and so we wanted to coordinate our efforts with them because they are responsible for the policies of the state of Ukraine for protection of the Gypsy community here in Ukraine, and so we tried to coordinate our efforts with them in providing food and different other types of assistance to the Roma people, to the Gypsies of Ukraine or here in Ukraine. Another important aspect, maybe not clearly, seen by some. There were the instances when Russian propaganda tried to, to divulge the information about the excesses against the Roma people here in Ukraine. You might remember that there were reports in the press that in Lviv there were Gypsy girls, young girls, were beaten by the locals. They were accused of, stealing, and so we are trying to register these facts. You might have heard of a stereotype of the Roma people being, very coherent, so to say, maintaining contacts. Unfortunately, I must dispel this stereotype. The Roma in Ukraine Roma people of Ukraine have practically lost any contacts with the Roma communities, Gypsy communities in the other countries. Therefore, we still have hope that something could be done in order to restore that, but that's the situation as it is now. Access to social services. I must say that some of the Roma people, some of the Gypsy families and people, they faced a number of manifestations of direct animosity and hostility, especially when they tried to find some housing, some dwellings for them to stay for some time. We are trying, as our organization is trying to find ways of improving the situation for them. According to our estimates, the members of the Roma community who became displaced, it's about 100,000 people. About 50,000 have left for abroad. We do not have any statistics on how many of them have already returned, because as has already been said, a lot of people returned into Ukraine after some time of staying in foreign countries. But in this situation, I should say that it's quite difficult for us to exactly identify the number of people, of the Roma people who are now in Ukraine. The problem of documents was mentioned, and I would like to say that according to our estimates, at least 30,000 Roma people are affected by this problem. They have their documents about the birth of the children, of marriages, and so on. These documents are missing, and this is a dramatic problem for the Gypsy community, because the lack of documents, of these documents, means the lack of access to humanitarian assistance, to housing, and so on and so forth. Thank you, Julian. And as we have heard, these problems that have been described, the problems of the vulnerable categories of population, they are very topical, very acute in Ukraine today. Especially as we have mentioned, among those vulnerable groups are those that have already had been confronting some prejudices among Ukrainian population, like the Gypsy community and the LGBT and the internally displaced persons of different nationalities. Therefore, the efforts of our organization should be, non-governmental organizations should be focused on these, on the aim of, lightening this, alleviating the burden of these problems, the load of this problem. Speaking about the LGBT community problems, certainly we should, as the LGBT communities of the other countries, speak about the facilitation of the same-sex marriages and the other similar problems. Let me now turn the floor over to the representative of the LGBT Center, Nash Svit, Mr. Kravchuk, Andriy Kravchuk. Mr. Kravchuk says that being a member of the LGBT community does not mean that people do not have or cease to have civil rights, and in this situation as members of LGBT community, we also resist Russian aggression, because we know that the attitude towards LGBT movement is rather hostile in Russia, and I can refer to I can refer to the experience of our own organization, and our organization has even faced an attack on the part of territorial defense unit. The police investigated that attack, and they appeared to be the members of the Ukrainian volunteer battalion Karpatska Siege. We were also accused of some illegal activities. The police searched the premises of our organization. Then there was another attack by those same people. Our door was broken out, and our office was practically robbed of everything that was valuable. And after that, I think we have no illusions with regard to the local attitudes towards the LGBT community. There have been a number of instances when Ukrainian territorial defense units, their members, beat the members of the LGBT community, and some of the LGBT community members were manhandled and beaten by the Ukrainian Territorial Defense Unit. I'm sure that these territorial defense units, they have their own chain of command, and some of their leaders should somehow react to these excesses. And when we visited one of the AHQs of a local unit of Ukrainian territorial defense, we wanted to protest against the beating of the members of the LGBT community. We were witnesses to the beating by the police of all the detained. We saw a lot of people detained for not observing the curfew. They were detained by the police after 11 o'clock. And all of those detained were beaten in front of us. So we qualify these actions by the Ukrainian police as the hatred crimes. And so these conditions of hostilities are, as I have said, are very difficult for the LGBT community, and so our LGBT center organized a number of shelters for the internally displaced persons members of the LGBT community. At the same time, we serve the members of the LGBT community. They serve in the armed forces. The LGBT condition is or is not treated by law in Ukraine as something that can free someone from military service. So the members of the LGBT community serve in the Ukrainian armed forces. There were some rumors that transgender people could be somehow exempted, but it can only be when people change, who have changed their sex, and the extreme right-wing organizations who have been our traditional, opponents, they have been very hostile towards the members of the LGBT community. I'm not saying that they share the values that are against LGBT, the LGBT community. I was also mobilized into the armed forces of Ukraine, and I left the will to my civil, so to say, civil union husband, a man with whom I have lived for the last 25 years. And I hope that the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian authorities would find, necessary political will in order to register and ratify, well, rather to adopt and ratify and enact the law on legalizing the same-sex marriage in Ukraine. The government needs also to overcome here the resistance of some of the religious organizations, and I'm talking about not only the law that is needed, new law on civil marriages, but also about the necessary changes to the criminal code of Ukraine, which provides for criminal punishment for same-sex marriages. Well, thank you, Andriy, for your contribution. I would like to point out that practically all the NGOs represented at our today's meeting, they all cooperate with the so-called Council for the renewal, so-called renewal, and this National Committee or Council for the renewal that deals with the issues of human rights. I hope that these issues of the broadening of the civil rights in Ukraine, speaking about the removing removal of this article of the criminal code that criminalizes homosexuality in Ukraine, homosexual relations rather in Ukraine, and the other areas of human rights that would promote development of human rights in this country, and it might also facilitate the deoccupation, the efforts towards deoccupation by the Ukrainian armed forces, and thus also facilitate the strengthening of the state of Ukraine. Let me now thank all the speakers, and let us take a look if we have any questions from our viewers and listeners. We have a question from a journalist from Israel. How can be assisted, though, the prisoners of war who were captured by the Russian armed forces? Mr. Zisels says that I have no exact information about the prisoners of war of the Jewish ethnicity, although we know that in that Azov regiment there was a group of people, about 40 people, who were considered to be Jewish people, and along with all the other prisoners of war, they were transported into the territory of Russian Federation. But I have no information about the efforts of the Jewish NGOs with regard to the assistance to those prisoners of war. We are aware that the Jewish organizations in Russia, they are taking care of the civilians who were affected, who have been affected by the hostilities, but we have no information about anything done with regard to the